So a big welcome to everybody. My name is Martha Hewson. I work for the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, and I'm also the chair of the Accelerated Education Working Group. So this webinar today focuses on the findings from a study that the Accelerated Education Working Group conducted in South Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda, and DR Congo. And in these four countries, INTPA, which is the European Union Directorate-General for International Cooperation and Development, has been implementing or funding a multi-year grant which has accelerated education in. And this study focuses on accelerated education in these four countries and the findings from it. But today we're going to hear from colleagues in South Sudan, and we're going to hear from colleagues in UNESCO, Windle Trust, and Plan International. If you can have the next slide, please, Lauren. So just a very quick webinar housekeeping. I think everyone can read these for yourselves, but the participant audio and video are disabled. And if you can please post your questions using the Q&A function, but at the end, hopefully we'll have time for Q&A as well. As you know, this session is being recorded and there's closed captioning available, and the recording will be available after the webinar. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the webinar, brief introduction to the AEWG by myself, Martha Hewson, and then Jessica Oddy is going to share the key findings from the four countries. She's the author of the reports. Then we're going to hear from the different education projects in South Sudan. As I said, a project around or focusing on pastoralist education from UNESCO, a project focusing on accelerated education at the secondary level from Windle Trust, and then Plan International focusing on an accelerated education program that specifically targets girls. And as I mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And I will let the presenters introduce themselves before they present. So the Accelerated Education Working Group, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with us, or I hope you are, but it's an interagency working group. It's part of the INEE, and it's made up of several different stakeholders who work in accelerated education. Our overall aim is to improve the quality of accelerated education, but we have these 5 areas of focus that you can see on the screen here. So our first area of focus really focuses on working at a national level, working with governments to try and have accelerated education included in national education plans and policy. And we have several research projects going on that really tries to support strengthening the evidence base for accelerated education. We work to improve the quality, and that's largely through the development and dissemination of our tools and guidance. And then we have advocacy, advocating to ensure that accelerated education programs are better resourced by all key stakeholders for scale and quality. And then in 2020, we added a 5th area of focus, which is around supporting the COVID-19 response. And I think in the chat there, you can see more information. You can see our 2021 brief, which will be updating. And also you can be directed to the INEE page that has all of our resources on. Next slide, please. So looking at our national level engagement, working directly with governments, in 2021 and early 2022, we've really been able to do a lot of country level engagement, and this has been really supported hugely by the work that Jess has been doing during 2021. We've been really able to engage in the 4 BRICE countries, so Uganda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and DRC. And we've done these in-depth country studies, which Jess will be sharing the findings from. And then in early 2022, we also held accelerated education workshops in Tanzania, Uganda, and DRC, and we developed action plans focused on system strengthening, which we'll be taking forward in the coming year specifically. And I think the work with the BRICE project and in collaboration with INTPA and NRC has also really influenced and complemented a lot of the work in our research. We're doing a research project called Access, which is funded by Dubai Cares, and that works in Nigeria, Colombia, Jordan, Pakistan, and Uganda. And I think the work in the BRICE project has really, really complemented this. There's been a lot of lessons learned and sharing between the two pieces of research. So really, really happy to be here. And now I'm going to pass directly over to my colleague, Jessica Oddy, and she's going to take you through the findings. So thank you so much, and welcome, Jess.
Hi, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. I'm going to talk really, really briefly about the Building Resilience in Crisis Through Education reports. And as my colleague will share in the chat, over the course of 2021, the Accelerated Education Working Group, with the support of INTPA, had the opportunity to do some a deep dive into the kind of political economy of education, of specifically accelerated education in 4 countries, in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. And the reasons why we selected these 4 countries was closely tied to the BRICE funding, which through INTPA aimed to provide access to quality education in preschool, primary, and lower secondary levels for children in fragile and crisis-affected environments. One of the really interesting things about this multi-year grant was, again, that accelerated education featured in these four countries, but there was a real focus on research around teaching and learning to really understand and build the evidence base of what works best in crisis. And so if we could just move on to the next slide. We had the opportunity then to really understand what the state of AE in these 4 countries. And again, the reports, the links are in the chat, but I wanted to share just some of the key findings that surfaced across the 4 contexts, which can maybe help us think about how we set up and support accelerated education in wider contexts. And one of the things we found that within each of the countries, accelerated education learners are incredibly diverse. We have programs supporting primary AE, we have secondary education models, and we're really lucky today that we're going to hear about one of these flagship programs in South Sudan. We also found that accelerated education learners may be caregivers, they could be young parents, they're often unaccompanied children or young adults. We also have pastoralist communities, and again, we'll hear a little bit more about a program that is supporting these learners. We have students who are children associated with armed groups or formerly associated with armed groups. Some of our AE learners are also teachers, and we also have a large number of accelerated education learners who have never attended school. So all of these things show that, again, with such a diverse cohort of students as AE implementers, we really need to think about how we are supporting and enabling learning for such a diverse group. If we could move on to the next slide. We also found that across the 4 contexts, teachers and teacher training specifically featured within many of the AE interventions and programs. And again, similarly to the learners, the teachers came from a wide range of backgrounds. We had examples of male and female learners. Again, and differences there in some of the contexts. There were challenges around the recruitment of female teachers in AE spaces. We found that the teachers came from both refugee host communities. Many of the teachers were qualified with many years of experiences, but at the same time, we also found that there were a significant number of teachers who were not qualified, and again, would need kind of additional support to teach the curriculum. As I mentioned, professional development featured in all of the programs, but we also found that these professional development opportunities were not necessarily linked to national continuous professional development programs. They were often not accredited, although there were some exceptions, which we saw in Uganda. And there was less focus on subject-specific training and more around kind of pedagogical skills, which did not necessarily correspond with, again, the diverse range of students who would be in the classrooms. We also found that across the board, teacher attrition was an issue. There were also issues around pay, and teacher training and professional development was not linked to any increment in salaries. So again, for us, it raised questions around the quality of teaching and learning and the quality of professional development, and to really think about how we are supporting and equipping teachers who are working in some of the most challenging contexts. If we move on to the next slide. In all of the contexts, we found that accelerated education was primarily funded by international non-governmental organisations or donor agencies. And of course, with that, this put programs at significant risk. And we came across examples of programs that had managed to attain 1 or 2 or short-term funding for AE programs, but due to funding cuts as well, programs were often discontinued. It was also quite surprising that the AE was predominantly funded primarily by external donors, considering that in many of the contexts, there were very enabling policies around accelerated education within the national frameworks. We also found, again, that there were differences within teachers who were on government payroll, whereas in other places, teachers received incentives. And as I mentioned before, there were also differences in the incentive payments, which led to a teacher attrition. And again, because of the nature of this unstable funding, the nature of not having sustainable funding, we saw that this was a real risk to the programs. And if we just move on to the next slide. So when it came to evidence and learning, the report goes into detail about the many different types of ways that that the learning, research and evidence captured accelerated education progression. However, whilst there was some programmatic data, we found that that on a whole, information tended to be quite sparse. There were learning assessments in all the contexts that showed that even though many children may be accessing accelerated education, we also saw that many children were falling behind. We also found that there was some gaps, particularly around disaggregated data and very little information on children with disabilities or other markers which could inform and shape their educational experiences. And so one of the key things coming out of this as well was the need to really strengthen monitoring and evaluation across AE programs, and for this to be built into projects. We also found there was very little consideration on the part of language of instruction, which may play on some of the learning issues which arises, which is quite interesting considering the wide range of students and languages being spoken in the classrooms. And if we move on to the next slide, we found then across the board that there were many brilliant examples around how programs had adapted to COVID-19. And I think in the Q&A we'll have time as well to please ask the panelists to share more about how their programs adapted to the pandemic. And many of these practices are things that we would encourage practitioners to take forward and build into their programs going forward. We saw examples of micro classes, of teacher and parent and community relationship strengthening. We heard about kind of language, radio instruction, supporting learners, and we also saw, again, real commitments to home learning packages and coaching models, which really supported students who have, who need this additional needs and supports. If we move on to the next slide, So again, just to summarize really, really quickly, and I would hope you would all go and check out the reports. We also have an executive summary that, again, there were many common themes across all contexts. And some of the key things that we felt could be explored further were the kind of impacts of school closures and the good lessons that could be continued post-COVID, or currently. We also saw that across the board transition rates between levels into secondary school declined, particularly for girls, and when there was data, we saw this decline for children with disabilities. As I mentioned, we felt there was a clear need to review, strengthen and support multilingual instruction in accelerated education programs, and questions around how do you accelerate learning, language learning. We saw brilliant examples of parents in the wider community supporting learning during the pandemic and thinking about how this could be strengthened and continued going forward for more sustainable programming. And then in general, we felt that, again, because of the specific and diverse range of students' needs that enter an AE classroom, there really needs to be a focus on equity and equity-centered approaches to ensure people are able to enroll and thrive in AE. And so we are now going to, if we can move on to the next slide, I'm now going to hand over to our colleague, Dr. Tap in Juba, who's going to talk about a really exciting program.
Thank you so much, colleague. Thank you, Jessica and the colleague, for this opportunity. This is really a very interesting forum to share some of our work that we have been undertaking in South Sudan. So thank you so much for this opportunity. As you can see in the title, so UNESCO Juba jointly with the FAO under the funding from EU, we have actually implemented a project called this pastoralist livelihood and education project in South Sudan between 2015 and 2021 in 2 phases. There was a break in between in the 2028. Can you go to next slide, please? Yes, I think in the background, I don't need to give you more background there. Actually, as you know, South Sudan context, colleagues in South Sudan, they also know very well the context, and the colleague outside, the context very well. Actually, even in the South Sudan is one of the kind of least literacy rate having country, below 50% literacy rate among the 29 countries in the world, and South Sudan's current literacy rate is around 34.7%. So meaning majority of the populations are still striving for reading and writing and the numeracy in this country. And also this in South Sudan, the project I'm now discussing with, about 60 to 80% of the population actually belongs from the pastoralist community in South Sudan, and this community is mobile in nature, and this community basically received limited services to improve their livelihood because they are mobile in nature. So in the spirit of leaving no one behind and achieve the 2030 agenda, there's a need to extend livelihoods, literacy, numeracy, life skills, basic skill training, intervention to the pastoralist communities in South Sudan. I keep saying in South Sudan, meaning different development partners, donor agencies, UN agencies, INGOs and NGOs in South Sudan. Sometimes I see who are only working for the 40% population, and the 60% population, there's a big risk of being left behind. So that's why this kind of project need to be really initiated and scaled it up. So UNESCO and FAO in partnership with the government line ministries, basically 3 ministries are on board, and also through the generous funding support from EU, designed and adopted the pastoralist livelihood education fields project model, and one of the best innovative partnership to improve pastoralist knowledge and skills that we found it actually. And this approach provided excellent entry points and a platform to improve pastoralist knowledge and the skills. And the pastoralist livelihood and education field schools approach initiated the combining livelihood interventions with an education component in it. This is a kind of integrated project. Literacy linking to the livelihood, education linking to the livelihood project basically. And project integrates pastoralist field school with pastoral education to enhance resilience of pastoralist communities' livelihood, in fact. So this project is implemented with the 3 line ministries, as I said, and also main 2 implementing partners, Norwegian People's Aid and also International Institute for Rural Reconstruction. So currently, we have reached to the 21 cattle camps through 63 learning groups, comprising 4,500 plus learners, out of which 1/3 are female, including children and youth. Next slide, please. And the beneficiaries, as I already said, in the Lake State, the Erol East, Erol West, Oweril, Rumbek Center, Rumbek East, Quebec, and the Rumbek North, and the Central Equatoria, Tarekeka. Basically, out of 10 state and 3 administrative areas, this project implemented in 2 states, basically. I would say some part of the 2 states. And the target beneficiaries, as I already said, we have reached to 21 cattle camps, young children between age between 8 to 12 years, and youth age between 13 plus years, and adults above 18s. Ministries, staff, and community facilitators and teachers were also trained, during the training. And the project partner, as I already said, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Fishery, Ministry of Livestock, Ministry of Education, Ministry of General Education and Instruction. And similarly, the respective ministry at the state levels were also involved during the project implementations, and also NGOs, and as I said, our implementation partners, Norwegian People's and IIRR. Next slide, please. So can you display? Yeah, this project basically enhanced food and nutrition security and livelihood resilience. Basically, this is the kind of sort of theory of change, or this is the the flow chart we have designed that will really help. Actually, basically, it has a 2 major kind of areas. Basically, we thought actually improved livelihood security and empowerment, and also institutions and community empowered to mitigate shocks. And for these 2 components, there are some underneath kind of outputs like livelihood diversifications and the skill transfer and education essentials, and also it's a CBDRR and coordination mechanism. Basically, and these were done through livelihood diversification was done through training members on income generation activities and support income generation activities, and also like some other activities like this vaccinations and all this. And the skill transfer and education is this is basically UNESCO was implementing this component within the project. We have trained the facilitators. We have developed the pastoralist livelihood education curriculum. We have actually prepared materials in literacy, numeracy, and alternative accelerated learning programs, and tested this in the fields, and also we have designed some learning materials. Similarly, for this community-based DRR, so DRR mobilization action plans developed, and then support action plans, and also like some training were designed. So technical work and coordination was really very interesting in this project. As you can see, this is the inter-ministerial project implemented by UN agency jointly, right? And this is in this way I would say this is a unique coordination mechanism in South Sudan. At the national level, we have actually established a technical working group comprising members from each relevant ministries, like Ministry of Livestock, Ministry of Fishery, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of General Education and Instruction, and Ministry of Gender, Social Welfare and Children. So this technical working group actually were actually established at the beginning of the project, and they were actually consulted during the different phase of the project, like the designing the action plan, work plan, approval of the work plan, implementation of the work plan, and these expertise from the ministries were actually utilized while training to the people according to their own expertise. Also at the state level, also there were a kind of this technical working group were also formed at the state level. We called national level technical working group and the state level technical working groups. During the project, actually regional exposure were provided. In Nairobi, in Kenya, there is a similar kind of pastoralist livelihood education project implemented. At the beginning, the government colleague basically and our implementation partners were actually sent for an exposure trip there, and then there was some good learning, and some learning was actually adapted into the South Sudanese context. And also during the project, actually the project has really developed or created, I would say, kind of pool of trainers. Those who were used during the training, and now I am happy to share with that these trainers are now being even utilized by other agencies for similar kind of training in other states as well, which is really very, very good. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. And then why this is needed? I mean, I already said actually, so this is not a new curriculum. It's a hybrid kind of an adopted from the existing curricula. Basically, I wouldn't say this is completely new, but we have tested a kind of new methodology, I would say, where we have actually tailored some of the contents that are actually relevant to the respective context. So that's done, and this is a flexible and the contextualize and adopt. As you know, the cattle riders, basically pastoralist community, they are mobile in nature, and the time wise also all the day they are with the cattle outside from even their camps. So actually the classes were actually implemented according to their time basically, and the facilitator were actually chosen from their own community and given comprehensive training so that they can actually handle the issue. Also, this is a kind of experiential, age appropriate and activity based basically. As you can see, we have worked entire population in the cattle camps, children, youth and adult. Basically we have worked with them, so that's also good. And as I said, tailored the needs of the pastoralist communities. So PLEFS is actually premised and geared to attaining the national goals of education in Republic of South Sudan. As you can, you may be aware, actually, this accelerated education system is very much kind of prioritized within the government system here, considering actually over 2.8 million school-age populations are still out of school, and there is a heavy school dropout, especially transitioning from primary to the secondary level is really very low. Even among the the transitioners, transitioning students, the girls transitioning is again further very low. So that's why this is something very much actually this is supporting, like some alternative means of education to such kind of mobile community in South Sudan. And it is also directed by the objectives and principles of alternative education system, as we all say. That also you were sharing at the beginning in your slide. I can see this really fits in what this alternative accelerated education is trying to do. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, these are sectoral pillars of the support. Basically, this is basically focusing on three areas, I would say: education, agriculture, and the livestock. These are the three main areas, basically, where and then the areas were chosen as cattle campers, as pastoralist community in the cattle camps are engaged with. So that's why these three areas are basically there. It's a very intersectoral kind of thing. Education linking to agriculture and the livestock, and through which actually education linking to the livelihood of the pastoralist community. Next slide, please. So structure, as I already said in the curriculum is in three level of learning were used basically for the children, youth and adults. and actually it integrates the information on cross-cutting issues such as gender, environmental care, climate change, health and hygiene, HIV, community-based disaster reduction, inclusion, peace building, education, and conflict resolution. This is also one of the important area. The last one actually also, for in the South Sudanese context, especially you might have heard there are lots of intercommunal fighting going on, and there is a lots of fighting among the cattle campers, among the cattle riders, going on. Somehow the evaluation shows that actually this project has actually somehow contributed to lower the guns that the cattle riders actually carry on while actually riding their cattle. So this project is really contributing. Even myself, when I was in the field, so when I talked to the beneficiaries in person, so they were really happy to have this project. And the approach we have adopted as adult module, which has the facilitators book only. All others have a set of three sets of the people materials, a syllabus for every subject and the grades, and the learner's book, and the teachers facilitators guides for every subject and grades were actually developed and actually supported. And some materials were also developed in the Dinka language, a local language that they speak. Next slide, please. Yeah, this curriculum for children and the subject areas are basically the common, as actually within the overall framework of the South Sudan's AES curriculum that we followed that curriculum, and actually we adapted that curriculum. As I said, actually we tailored the content according to the context needed, and this is how actually children are being taught at the cattle camp, because this community is a mobile in nature, so the facilitator have to move according to the community move. That's why that's why the facilitator were chosen from the same community, same cattle camp. Next slide, please.
Dr. Tapp, just to note,
Yes.
you just have like 1 minute.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
I'll be finishing soon actually. Yeah, so not I mean maybe 2-3 slides. Thank you. So this
Yes.
is again for the curriculum for youth. Also we have some competencies. So basically just wanted to tell you that this curriculum for children, youth, and actually adults were very much aligned with the national curriculum designed by the Ministry of General Education and Instructions, and further adapted according to the country context, local context. Next slide, please. So similarly for the adults also the same thing. So as I already shared. Next slide, please. So some key issues and challenges, basically, like I would say these are done in a specific context and challenges. Even the pastoralist community in the different states have a different kind of they speak different language, at least different dialects, and different cultural practices as well. That's why it has to be further adapted. And then the government is trying to mainstream it. The curriculum has been already mainstreamed, but they would like to make it a national kind of curriculum that can fit into every context. Basically they would like to prepare a national prototype kind of documents. Also challenges are basically facilitating to the and mentoring to the facilitators. They are trained now. We have trained 63 facilitators. At the beginning, this was agreed that actually government will actually take them on actually, and then these centers will continue. So far, the centers have not yet been continued. So this is something donor is also questioning us, and we have been talking to the government, and thanks to the government from this year. So in Rumbek, in the Lake State, when I was there, they said actually some of the teachers will be put into government payroll from this year so that the classes can continue. So these are some challenges I put here. If you have any questions, so we can see this global, this COVID-19 pandemic also so created some challenges for us. Just one thing that I would like to share with you that, so we have provided tablets to the facilitator, uploading all the contents in it, so that facilitator can carry those tablets. They can prevent with the kind of small solar panel that can be charged anywhere, anytime. So that was used even during the pandemic period again actually, and we have used the local community radio to disseminate the messages to among the facilitators, so that facilitator can further disseminate message to the cattle campers. Next slide, please. So some recommendation, I would say this is one of the interesting model here. As I said in the beginning, methodology was tested, materials designed, so frameworks are there. So I would really encourage other partners in South Sudan and outside of the South Sudan, like to further look into this document and actually try to implement this in. And the partners in South Sudan are really encouraged to scale it up in other pastoralist communities to reach to the unreached population. As I believe in South Sudan, unless we reach to the 60% of the population, 60% section of the population, we will not reach to the education goal for the South Sudan. That's why this is most important and urgent areas to be intervened. Next slide, please. I think this is the last slide for me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then apology for taking a bit of more time. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Tapp. So now I'll just go speedily on and welcome Windle Trust International. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Loke Justin Gordon. I work for Windle Trust International, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Martha, for inviting us to present something on accelerated secondary education program. Next slide. Hello, yes. Windle Trust conceived the idea of accelerated secondary education after conducting a research on secondary education that is way back in 2017. We also found out that most primary school teachers did not complete secondary education. Windle Trust, therefore, engaged education experts in the Ministry of General Education on what could be done to support, especially teachers, to acquire secondary school education. On that note, in March 2019, Windle Trust International organized a stakeholders workshop to discuss accelerated secondary education as an option. And indeed, the workshop was attended by the Ministry of Education, Undersecretary, and the Director-General, in which the principle of expanding the accelerated education to secondary was agreed. In late 2019, working with the Ministry of Education, we reviewed alternative education policy to include the accelerated secondary education program. That means that the new born baby, that is the accelerated secondary education, was officially included into the education policy, and it became one of the programs in the Ministry of General Education. So in late 2019, Windle Trust International, working with the Ministry of General Education, condensed the 4-year secondary education curriculum for accelerated secondary education to be delivered in 2.5 years. So from 4 years, we condensed the curriculum to 2.5 years. The half of the year, that is the half months, is basically meant to give the teachers intensive English language training to prepare them, as we shall see. So Windle Trust International then presented both the revised alternative education policy and the condensed curriculum to the Ministry of General Education, and both the policy and the condensed curriculum were approved by the government. Next slide, please. Next slide. Hello?
Yeah, I think a lot, the slide has changed here.
Okay, all right. So what is the accelerated secondary education program? What are we targeting? We are targeting mainly adults who have successfully completed their primary education through either the formal or the non-formal systems, but have not been able to continue their secondary education. I must inform all that many of the adults have been inconvenienced by the war that we have been in the country, and most of them have not completed their secondary education, and they are teaching in the primary schools. So accelerated secondary education expects to serve the unqualified teachers who did not transition to and who have dropped out of secondary education and they are now teaching due to either economic circumstances that they cannot continue, or maybe the age limit. They have become big and they find it very difficult to go to the formal classrooms to sit with the young children. So they opt to drop out. So that is what we target, those unqualified teachers who are teaching currently. It is also, we also target other groups in similar situations and occupations. And in all the cases, we prioritize vulnerable women, especially the young mothers. So our target in the accelerated education program is that we look at the untrained teachers as the target number one, and the second target is the vulnerable women, especially the young mothers who could have dropped out of their education, maybe because of early pregnancies or any other factors. So what are the levels of the accelerated secondary education? After the approval of the policy, we therefore came up with the 2 levels. And level 5 comprises of senior 1 and senior 2 curriculum. We put that together to be level 5. Then level 6 is senior 3 and senior 4. So that makes the 4 years into 2 years. Next slide, please. Yes. How do we select the learners? Currently, as I mentioned earlier, that the target is untrained teachers. And thus all the learners must be teaching in the primary school. And in addition, they should fulfill some of the requirements, like they should have qualified for secondary school entry. That is, they must have passed the primary school leaving examinations or its equivalent. Number 2, they have to provide letters of support from their present or previous schools, unless if circumstances do not allow them. So they have to come with these letters, either from the head teacher or from any other responsible person in the school. They should also be out of formal schooling, at least for a period of 18 to 24 months that somebody has dropped out. Because we also want to eliminate these other children from the conventional schools, you know, to cross over to the accelerated secondary, because they will only finish their 2 years. So we put that condition that somebody who joins must have stayed at home for some time, at least 18 or 24 months. Must be an adult and therefore over age for the formal secondary school. And then he or she must have passed a basic literacy and numeracy entry test to show that they have sufficient skills enough to benefit from the secondary school course. The type of test that we give is basically a diagnostic test of skills and not content knowledge. Next slide. Okay, yes. How do we select their teachers or facilitators? We call them tutors because they are teaching teachers, so we call them tutors. One is that the tutors should be a qualified secondary school teacher, qualified to teach the subject that they offer. So if you are not qualified, you are not entitled to handle our classes. Number 2 is you must have had at least 2 years recent experience in teaching the subject at a secondary school level. You must have undergone a 5-day orientation course on how to teach an accelerated program, how to use an approach which increases learner independence, and how to handle the condensed curriculum, which we have come up with. They should also be re-enumerated as the part-time teachers, and based on actual number of subjects and hours that they teach. So our program runs in the afternoon. These teachers will first teach in the conventional program from morning up to at least 1. Then at 2, they come to our classes to handle our learners. They should also be responsible. They are responsible for their subject, including assessment, record keeping, managing the learning materials, as well as teaching in the classrooms. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. We have a recommended timetable, and we have 20 hours a week, which is delivered by having 3 hours each day, Monday to Friday, and then 5 hours on Saturday. So the Saturday lessons begin at 8 until 1:40. Number 2 is that the whole course should, at least level 1 should have completed 42 hours, contact hours of teaching in a year, and then 4 weeks of examinations. The course will have to finish 2.5 years duration, depending on the context and the experience of the learners. What I must let you know is that this is a flexible course, and a learner is not tied to the same class as long as the tutor has already assessed and seen that this learner can be moved to the next class. It is not a fixed, program, but you can move quickly through the program. And then subject allocation reflects the time distribution in the secondary schools. There are specific number of hours that are given to subjects, different subjects. Next slide. For example, I think this is the last slide. What is the impact of the program? Well, volunteer teachers will have to upgrade for further studies. After acquiring or sitting for their senior 4, they get the certificate and they are able to continue. Number 2, it also reduces the number of out of school and the adults who are very many adults. They'll be able to join the program. The quality of education definitely improves in terms of delivery as many teachers become trained after joining the TTIs for qualification. The teachers will have increased even their salaries by upgrading, because there is a system, grading system in South Sudan, that when you become qualified, there is a grade that you are supposed to get. The learners are also an important resource in the teaching and the learning process. Many children get enrolled in the school because the quality of the teaching and the learning will have improved, even the environment as a result of professional development of the teachers. And lastly, there is a reduction of literacy levels in the country. Next slide. I believe that is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was really interesting to hear about accelerated education at the lower secondary level, and especially with teachers. So now jumping straight into Plan International. Welcome, Plan. Please introduce yourself and then try and be fast so we have a few minutes for questions at the end if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martha. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Harriet Tino. I work for Plan International here in South Sudan. We shall be making a presentation with my colleague, Michael. Generally, as already indicated by UNESCO and our colleagues from Windle Trust, generally South Sudan is still in a humanitarian situation, and most of our projects at the moment are education in emergencies programs. And we are running accelerated education programs in 3 locations in Central Equatoria, targeting Yei. We have another project in Kapoita East, and then we have another one in Greater Pibor administrative areas. These are areas of high returns, high displacement, and we also have a lot of movements related to pastoral communities. The project also targets, war-affected communities, like I said earlier, and particularly this one is in Yei, where we currently have an active conflict. We have a lot of children affected by armed conflict, and this is the target group for that location. Most of our accelerated learning programs are integrated within the government formal education system and informal education program as well. Next slide. So generally, as I said, we have programs that are funded by ECHO. We also have another project that is funded by Disaster and Emergency Committee, that is the DEC. And the other project is funded by Education Cannot Wait. So at the moment, we have 2 programs, Accelerated Education System. And basically, this runs within the government schools. And the focus is that the learners who will have completed level 4 of accelerated education can transition to the next level, which is secondary. We also have quite a number of learners who are transitioning to vocational training opportunities. Then the second modality is the community girls' school. Particularly, this one is targeting locations where we have a lot of girls who have not had opportunity to go to school. And this program is in Kapoita and Magwe. And for community girls' school, normally the practice is that the learners complete 3 levels of learning, level 1, level 2, level 3. And then after that, they can immediately transition to the formal education and join at primary 5, which is level 5. Next slide. So today, what we want to share with you is a success story about how our programs have been able to enroll more females into accelerated learning. As already pointed out by other colleagues, in South Sudan, the rate of completion among girls is very low. We have about 38% dropout rate among girls. And for any other education program that we run, normally the dropout rate among girls is high. So particularly this project worked around using program integration, bringing in education in emergencies, child protection in emergency, and WASH to target issues around COVID-19. This program is funded by ECHO, as I said earlier, and it provides certified education opportunities for out of children and youth. Our target group is 12 to 18 years. However, when we look at the enrollment, sometimes we find young girls and children associated with armed conflict above 18 years. So exceptionally, this is considered as within the government system, this is as well allowed. So sometimes we have that flexibility. The program also targets girls and women forced into marriage, and then children associated with armed conflict, the CAFAG, as I mentioned earlier. And then we still have other vulnerable groups of children, unaccompanied and separated children that we find within those locations. And then generally children who are affected by armed conflict, like those who are in displacement, they are sent to IDP camps and places like that. Next slide. The best practices that has enabled us to retain more females in accelerated education. One of them is a safe school environment. Through the programs that we have, we run some integrated programs around ensuring that we have safe school plans, that looks at some of the risks within the school and come out with mitigation measures. We also do other programs on mine risk reduction, education, and things like that. And for issues around sexual violence, we do safety audits within the schools. And currently we are having an advocacy strategy to advocate for schools that are still occupied by the armed groups. Like in Yei, we have about 29 schools that are currently occupied, or the armed forces have moved out of the schools, but still living within the school environment. So those kinds of advocacy programs have been very essential in helping us, have more girls in schools. Our awareness sessions normally emphasizes the importance of girls' education. And I think this has really been a very good initiative so far that has enabled us, to reach out to more adolescent and young women to enroll for accelerated education. We also provide learning and teaching materials. I think as mentioned already by UNESCO, in South Sudan, most of the education programs are actually supported by partners. So we give a full package of whatever is required for a child to go to school. So generally, provision of these materials, I think, has been one very good factor that has contributed to the enrollment of more girls. We also do specific trainings on gender pedagogy, conflict-sensitive education, school-based psychosocial support and child protection in most of our education trainings. And we found this very relevant, and the teachers are capacitated to address the needs of girls in schools. We also noted some challenges where we wanted to have more female teachers, support learners in those schools. But this is not practical, as many of our teachers in South Sudan are actually males. So for us to be able to address this, we sometimes train and mentor, some female persons in the community, like within the PTA member or some other person to support girls. And then one of the big successes has also been around menstruation hygiene management activities in the schools. And this has included distribution of dignity kits, where we give out, already made reusable sanitary pads and other packages inclusive. But also we found that a more sustainable approach is actually to train the girls on how to hand make the sanitary materials using local materials. So currently those are some of the practices that has enabled us to enroll and retain more girls. We also follow a flexible learning schedule, as mentioned by Windle Trust already. Our accelerated education normally runs in the afternoon. So the learners have opportunity, to do their house chores, take care of their families before they come to the schools in the afternoon. And we found that this is really ideal for this category of learners. We've also established childcare facilities within the schools. We found that a number of young women who enroll for accelerated education have babies, and we want to encourage them to keep coming to school with their babies. So normally we get, some nannies or persons who can take care of these children while the learners are in class. And because they have their children nearby, if maybe a child needed to breastfeed, they are still able to quickly do that and return to class. And we've also been mainstreaming child protection and SGBV activities. As noted, most of issues around access to education are intrinsically linked to protection concerns. So we find that this is quite relevant. In some locations, we have child-friendly spaces that are running within the schools. We have child rights clubs that are within the schools. We do protection monitoring activities within the school. So usually if there is any concern that a learner has, then it can also be addressed at school level. We do case management as well within the schools. We've also tried to develop some linkages, referrals for other interventions, like in other locations where we have food assistance program, where we have nutrition programs. We ensure that the beneficiaries that are accessing our accelerated learning are linked to that, so that they can, support their families better and be able to attend school at the same time. Next slide. So this is just a graph showing our enrollment. Surprisingly, you can see that we've managed to have more girls enrolled as compared to the boys. And in the recent national exams, we've also had more of our female learners, actually more than the males, sitting the national examinations after they completed level 4. Next slide. Now, the next slide, I am gonna talk about community girls school. This is another approach that we're using, especially within the pastoralist communities. This program is funded by Education Cannot Wait, and the location is in Eastern Equatoria. Next slide. So for Community Girls School, we are using this as an approach to tackle cultural barriers that relates with girls going out to school, or other communities actually not allowing their girl children to go to school. So the approaches that has led to these promising practices is that we have a focused gender transformative program, which is geared towards scaling up education opportunities for girls and women. And then we also use, this is one of our child protection module, Champion of Change module has been very, very useful in improving adolescent and girls level of participation to protection, to any other activities that happens within the community. So we find that through those initiatives, the girls understand the importance of them, accessing education, the importance of them addressing, issues around gender disparities. So this, to some extent, has contributed to many of them joining accelerated learning. We've also employed culturally sensitive education, which is being used in different areas. And Community Girls School as a modality of change to address cultural barriers is one of them. And then following the Community Girls School, using a condensed curriculum, they have a very specialized condensed curriculum that allows these girls to transition to a formal education at some level. So much as community girls education provides opportunity for girls to learn, there is also a very clear transition pathway where they can easily join the formal education. Next slide.
Harriet, just maybe one more minute because we're running out of time. Thank you.
All right. Okay, great. Yeah. So I think the achievements for that, for the Community Girls School is that, young girls and mothers feel comfortable to join schools. The schedule, as I already said, is also very conducive for many of them to join schools. Parents feel comfortable because, the children are learning within the communities and they're able, to see what is going on within the schools. We've also been doing quite a lot of COVID-19 related activities, ensuring that these learners are safe even when they're learning within the communities. And then, of course, issues around awareness happens as well. Next slide. Okay, for the recommendations, one of them is that we are still thinking on how best we could consider a transitioning pathway for accelerated education. Many of the learners, when they complete level 4, they are not able to join secondary for different reasons. And the government, I think, is not yet rolling out accelerated education for secondary. So many of them drop off at that level. We've also, been talking around providing capacity building and training for teachers. Most of the teachers that we're using are volunteer teachers. Some of them are not certified, they're not trained. We provide them, the small short-term trainings at the moment, but we're looking at, having opportunities to have long-term training. We've also seen the need for development of literacy and numeracy programs. As I indicated, our program particularly targeting only young persons up to 18 years, but we still have a lot of interest, for other learners above that age group. And then it remains important to strengthen, referrals and linkage for livelihood interventions, considering, the learners who are accessing accelerated learning. And then we found that program integration is actually a very good program modality to use, especially when we look around how to have more females accessing the accelerated learning. And then also the community girls school, again, much as some of the centers are within the communities, we want to ensure that it has a good structure that, allows easy transition for them to join formal education. Next. All right, I talked about program integration. I will not repeat that again. COVID-19, there are quite a lot of learnings that we have also drawn from that. And in our experience, we realized that there is no one standard, modality that can be used. We were able to use radio programs. We were able to use small group learnings. So generally, our recommendation is that considering the context, different modalities can be used. And then, of course, we've been, looking at some of the learning spaces, especially for locations where we still have insecurity. And we still think that we need to strengthen other programs around EORE or MRE sessions as well. And then special consideration for CAFAG. Again, like I said, this is a specialized group that needs attention of teachers and everybody else. So we still think that there is need to focus around that and ensure that the teachers have a good training to handle this kind of learners. Next slide. Yeah. And I think this is for the government to prioritize embedding accelerated learning into national system, institutions, and budgets as well, because many of those programs are supported by NGOs. And normally when projects, close, you find that those programs have also ended. And again, integration of AE trainings into national teaching training as well. I think this is very relevant. Institutional coordination and partnership are critical to ensure that accelerated education programs are harmonized and standardized. I think this is the last slide.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. We really, really appreciate everyone who has presented today and provided just a snapshot of some of the really interesting and innovative programs that have informed the report. And so we would encourage you all to read the report. And if you again have any questions, please get in contact. I'm not sure how, because we've slightly run over, I'm not sure if we do have time for a couple of questions. I'm not sure, Martha or...
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, actually, I think they were such interesting presentations. We've actually run over time. So we don't have any time for questions, but I'd just like to remind everyone that they can access this recording, and then also we'll be answering all the questions. So if you do have questions that were unanswered, they will be answered, and they will be put on a text with the recording, so you can always go back to them. So just a really big thank you to all the presenters from South Sudan, and a big thank you to Jessica, who actually was the author of these reports. And to remind you, and maybe Jessica, you can put the report links. The reports are available on the Accelerated Education page on the INEE site. So I'd really encourage you to go in and have a look at those. And there's reports in depth on each country. Then there's some overall recommendations for donors, for implementers, etc. And lastly, a big thank you to the Norwegian Refugee Council and to NORCAP and to the European Commission, who made the secondment of Jess to the AEWG for a year and made it possible to do all this work. So a really big thank you. So thank you again to the panelists, and I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to your questions, but we'll for sure answer them. And I wish you all, for me, it's a good evening, but maybe for some of you, a good morning or a good afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.